The urinary system is going to be a very important human body system that is responsible for regulating different fluids inside of our bodies. It is going to be important for removing toxins and chemicals from our body. And the main components of the urinary system, you can see them in the diagram here. We're going to have 2 kidneys, and they will do most of the filtration work. And then those kidneys are going to be connected to our bladder. Now, if we look at this a little bit closer, here we have a cross section of the front of the human body. We can see the kidneys in there. There are 2 of them. We have the right and left kidney, and the one on the right is going to be a little bit lower than the other. And then these are going to be connected by the ureters to the bladder. The kidneys themselves are going to bear the major responsibility of this system. They are responsible for eliminating nitrogenous waste, toxins, and drugs from the body. Looking at their functions a little bit more closely, first of all, they are disposing of waste and excess ions that might accumulate. They are responsible for regulating blood volume and the chemical makeup of the blood. They also produce renin, and renin is going to be very important for the regulation of blood pressure. So we can say that the kidneys do regulate blood pressure. And they're also producing this other compound, which is going to stimulate red blood cell production. So they are working together with the circulatory system. They also have a responsibility in converting vitamin D into its active form. Here's a closer look at the kidneys themselves. We have a cross-section of an actual kidney, and then we have a drawing of a kidney so we can compare them. And when we're looking at the kidneys, they do have kind of a kidney bean shape to them. And so there is this concave region on the kidney. This is called the renal hilum. And this location is going to be where a lot of things enter and exit the kidney. So we can see the ureters are coming out of this. We also have renal blood vessels and so veins and arteries that are entering and exiting here. And we're also going to have nerves that are entering in this particular location. Now, another thing is that we are going to have the calyx. We have a minor calyx and we have a major calyx. And these are basically passageways that are going to be collecting urine, which drains from the different pyramids that we do have in here. So if you look at this more closely, the kidney themselves, they have all of these little sections called pyramids. Those will be the functional units of the kidney, and they will be emptying into this region here. And so they empty in there, and then eventually these are going to travel out the ureter. The individual nephrons will be the structural and functional units of the kidney, and there will be a lot of these per kidney. Actually, these are responsible for forming urine, and over 1 million of them do exist per kidney. We can see 2 different types of nephrons in this image here. We will have the cortical nephrons, which we see circled, and then we also have what are called the juxtamedullary nephrons. And both of these nephrons are going to be composed of a network of tubules, and then these tubules are going to be associated with a collecting duct. The collecting duct itself is going to be collecting fluid from the nephrons and then passing that fluid on. Here we have a closer look at one of the nephrons, and we can see the relationship of nephrons with the collecting duct. Each nephron is going to consist of a renal corpuscle and then also a renal tubule. Looking at the actual functions of the nephrons, what each nephron is going to do when it is going through that urine formation process is it has 3 different stages or 3 different processes. First is going to be glomerular filtration, then we will have tubular reabsorption, and then we'll follow this up with tubular secretion. If we look at the glomerular filtration in the image that we have right here, it's designated with number 1. And what is going to happen is that we're going to have water and solutes that happen to be smaller than proteins, so pretty small stuff. It is going to be forced through the capillary walls and the pores of the glomerular capsule, and then it's going to enter the renal tubule. Now, the second thing that's going to happen is going to be tubular reabsorption. With tubular reabsorption, some substances from the filtrate, they're going to be reclaimed. So they're going to be collected again, and they will be returned to the blood. This is designated number 2 in our image. So water, glucose, amino acids, also other ions that we might need, they're going to be moving from the filtrate into the tubule cells, and then they'll ultimately pass back to the capillary blood. If we look at the process right here, we have the filtrate, which is going to be passing from the capsule through the series of tubules and ultimately makes its way to the collecting duct. Looking at this image right here, we can see certain substances leaving the tubule. They are shown in blue if this is going to be passive leaving of the tubule. So passive would mean that they are moving without energy being involved. And then we also have certain substances that are being actively transported out of the tubule, and these are going to be shown in red. So notice that as the filtrate is moving through the tubules and progressing towards the collecting duct, we have a number of substances that are basically going in and out of the filtrate. The third stage of this urine formation is going to be tubular secretion. With tubular secretion, some substances are going to move from the blood or the tubule cells into the filtrate, so they're going back into this fluid so that ultimately they can be eliminated from the body, and they will be eliminated in the form of urine. This is shown here as number 3 in our image. So things like hydrogen ions, potassium ions, creatine, drugs, lots of things, they will be removed from the blood, and then they're going to be secreted into the filtrate by those tubular cells. The filtrate, when we say filtrate, and I know I've mentioned filtrate a number of times, this is really similar to the blood plasma. The big difference is that it won't have the proteins in it. So it's not going to have things like hemoglobin in there. Urine is going to contain the nitrogenous waste and then also unneeded substances, which are things that we do want to ultimately eliminate from the body. So the urine is water plus various solutes that happen to be there. It's generally going to be slightly acidic. pH is around 6. And when it's in the body and when it exits the body initially, it is going to be sterile. It does have a heavier density than water has, and the reason for that is that it's not just water, it's water and then a lot of solutes that have been added to it. In this table right here, we're seeing some of the substances that we might find in the urine. All of these substances listed here would be abnormal, and their presence in the urine would indicate different health conditions. Glucose can commonly be found inside the urine. This might be just because we're taking in too much sugar, eating too many carbohydrates, but it can also be an indication of diabetes. Proteins in the urine is abnormal. We might have bacteria there, which would indicate a urinary tract infection. Red blood cells being there indicates bleeding. This could be caused by kidney stones or something along that line. Hemoglobin's presence might indicate a type of anemia. And if we have some bile there, bile pigments, this might indicate liver disease. So urinalysis is very common when we do go in for a medical checkup. A lot of times they will do urinalysis just to check for the presence of some of these substances in the urine. Another important component or components of the urinary system is going to be the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. So these are going to connect to the kidneys. They will work together with the kidneys. And if we talk about their functions a little bit more closely, the ureters will be the direct connections to the kidneys. These are going to collect or carry urine from the kidneys ultimately down to the bladder. And they will not just allow the urine to just drip through them into the bladder. They're going to propel the urine to the bladder by peristalsis. So there will be contractions that are moving that urine forward and into the bladder. The bladder itself, which is the largest structure that we see in this image here, it is a collapsible muscular sac. Its primary purpose is to temporarily store the urine until we're really ready to expel it from the body. It will open to the urethra, which is going to be where it actually exits from the body. This picture right here is showing us the bladder in another view. We can see in this image that the bladder does have this ability to stretch as it fills with urine. The bladder itself is actually going to extend superiorly, so it's going to extend upward when it does start to fill up or accumulate the urine. And then where this urine is going to go once the bladder is filled to capacity is it's going to go to the urethra, and the urethra itself will carry the urine out of the body. And again, we have the peristalsis, so some muscular contractions that are going to help propel the urine out of the body. The actual act of emptying the bladder is called micturition, or we also call this voiding. When the bladder accumulates enough urine, so approximately 200 milliliters of urine, once that happens, the urine is going to be forced past the internal urethra sphincter. So we have two different sphincters that will control the urine flowing out of the bladder. The internal urethra sphincter is going to be one that is involuntarily controlled. So just when we reach a certain capacity, this one is going to open and urine is going to start to flow down. Now, the urge to urinate is typically going to be felt at that point, and we will want to go to the bathroom and void. And when we're ready to do that, the external sphincter will be relaxed, and that is something that we control voluntarily. So basically, when we are ready, when it is convenient, we will release that external sphincter and urine will pass from the body. There can certainly be dysfunctions of urination, and here's just a couple of them. Incontinence is the inability to control the external sphincter. The external sphincter, we said, is the one that we voluntarily control. So that is the one that we will basically keep closed until we're ready to eliminate or void the bladder. Urinary retention is kind of an opposite problem because urinary retention is going to be the inability to expel the urine that's contained in the bladder. And so we need to be able to get that out of the bladder because, of course, the kidneys are going to continue to produce filtrate and they're going to continue to produce urine, and we want to be able to eliminate that. The kidneys, besides just producing urine, we listed a number of different functions for them. They do have an important role in regulating the consistency of our blood. So regulating blood composition and basically making sure that we keep that blood composition pretty much the same all of the time, regardless of what we are consuming, what we're actually doing. In this role, they have 4 different functions that they perform. First of all, they are involved in excretion of nitrogenous containing waste. They also maintain the water balance of the blood. They maintain the electrolyte balance of the blood. And in the end, they do also ensure a proper blood pH. The kidneys do help to maintain the water balance of the blood. So that is one of those functions. And when we're talking about total body water, our total body water, so all of the water that we have in our body, it is found in basically 3 different types. We have the intracellular fluid. Intra means inside. So here we're talking about the fluid that we do find inside of our cells. Besides that, though, we have a lot of fluid that's located out of our cells, and this is going to be the interstitial fluid. So these are the fluids outside of the cells. This includes the blood plasma, the interstitial fluid. We have a lot of cerebral spinal and other serous fluids, and then there's other fluids in addition to that, such as the vitreous fluid in the eye. So there are 2 different categories of water that we do find inside of our bodies. So in this image right here, we are seeing the functions of the lungs, the gastrointestinal tract, the kidneys, and all of these together are really working together with the circulatory system, and they are passing substances into the blood and then collecting them from the blood. So the blood plasma itself is going to circulate around the body. It's going to link up a number of different systems. And again, here we're just looking at 3 of them because we've got the respiratory system, the digestive system, and then also the urinary system. So the blood itself is going to link up these various systems that we have. So substances from these different systems are going to pass into the blood. They can pass through the interstitial fluid and they can pass into the different cells of our body. Now, when we talk about our water balance, we have basically an intake of water every day, and then we also have an output of water every day. And it is important that we balance our intake with our output so that we do not become dehydrated. So you can see that the intake of water, for the most part, this is from things that we are consuming. So we have about 60% of our intake is due to beverages that we drink. We have about 30% that's coming from the food that we eat. And then we also have about 10% that is coming from the various reactions that are being performed on an everyday basis. Now, as far as the output goes, most of it is leaving our body in the form of urine. So that's about 60% of the fluid that leaves. And then we also lose some through feces, sweat, different reactions that occur with the skin and the lungs. When the concentration of solutes in the blood plasma is high, we will have a number of osmoreceptors that are stimulated. These osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, they are going to stimulate what we call the thirst center. And when the thirst center is stimulated, this is going to cause certain sensations like the thirst sensation so that a person would want to take a drink. So that is one way that we're going to regulate the water balance. Another one is that the kidneys are going to certainly play a role, and the kidneys are going to be continuously adjusting urine output to help maintain the water balance. When we do discuss maintaining the water balance of the blood pressure is an important component of this. When our blood pressure begins to decrease, this is going to be sensed by a number of different receptors in our body, and there will be a number of different reactions that take place so that we do raise the blood pressure back up. The kidneys are going to play a key role in this, and it is a very complicated system, as you can see on this slide right here. But just to point out a couple key things, the kidneys are involved. We have a number of different hormones such as renin and antidiuretic hormone. They will be involved in this. We've got steroids down here like aldosterone. So all of these together are going to work to get the blood pressure back up, and the kidneys certainly play a key role with this process. The kidneys, besides just regulating the water balance of the blood, they also help to maintain electrolyte balance. This is very important because electrolyte concentrations, they do affect water movement, and that's water movement from one concentration to the other. So if we want to control water movement, we have to be able to control electrolyte balance. There are hormones such as ADH and aldosterone that are going to help regulate sodium ion content, and besides sodium ions, which would be Na+, they're also going to be regulating things like chlorine ions, potassium ions, and then also magnesium ions. We can see on this picture right here, there is also, when we're talking about blood pressure, there is some sodium being shown right here. So we do certainly have the electrolyte concentrations being regulated right along with the different activities that are regulating the water balance of the blood. The kidneys also play an important role in maintaining the acid-base balance of the blood. Our blood pH really needs to be maintained between 7.35 and 7.45. So that's a pretty small range. If we do get a little bit on the high side, we call that alkalosis. But if we get over 7.8 for our pH, then that does result in death. And if we get a little bit low, that's called acidosis. And if it's lower than 7, that's going to result in death. So it's very important that this pH of the blood is regulated and controlled, and there's a number of different systems that are involved in that. The kidneys are just one of them. So our blood pH is controlled by blood buffers, the respiratory system, and then also the kidneys. So all of those working together is going to regulate and help to maintain the blood pH in the range that it needs to be. The blood buffers do play an important role in regulating pH. These will bind hydrogen ions when the pH drops, and then when the pH goes up, they're going to release hydrogen ions. So pH is really all about hydrogen ions and the concentration of the hydrogen ions that happen to be present there in the blood in this case. In the image right here, we see what the acids are capable of doing. So with an acid, when we add that to solution, and here we have an example of hydrochloric acid, when we add that, it dissociates. So when we say dissociates, what this means is that the HCl is actually breaking apart into hydrogen ions, plus we have the Cl minuses. But it's the hydrogen ions that we're focusing on here. So when we're talking about an acid is going to increase the hydrogens. The acid over here is a weak acid, and with a weak acid, they do not immediately dissociate into their different components. So when we look at it over here, we can see that this particular one, when you add it to solution, many of them actually do still stay together, but then we do have some that dissociated. So the H2CO3, this might dissociate into H plus the other one, but this does not necessarily happen immediately upon dropping this into the water. When we're talking about blood pH, bicarbonate buffer is very important for maintaining the blood pH. Bicarbonate buffer is what we see in the image here shown in green. So this is bicarbonate, and it is involved in some reversible reactions, and that is how it functions as a buffer. The bicarbonate acid, which is what we have right here in the middle, it can dissociate into bicarbonate plus acid, And so that is what we see happening to some of these when it's dropped into the water up here. But then we can also have carbon dioxide combined with water to turn into carbonic acid. So there's a couple different reactions that can happen here, and depending on the pH of the blood, the reaction will go in one direction or the other. So this is going to work in conjunction with the respiratory system because, of course, carbon dioxide is something that the respiratory system is going to be collecting from the various cells in our body. So when we have carbon dioxide plus water, this is going to be converted into bicarbonate. That bicarbonate is able to break apart into hydrogen plus carbonic acid. And this is something that the kidneys can eliminate. They can process this further. They can also hold on to some bicarbonate in them as well. This is all important for regulating that overall pH of the blood. The renal control of blood pH, so the specific function of the kidneys is that they are able to rid the body of acids besides just carbonic acid. They do act relatively slowly, so when we're talking about their function, usually we're looking on the scale of hours to days, and they have two main functions. They can collect new bicarbonate ions, they can hold on to them, conserve them, and then they can also excrete them so they can rid them from the body. So they really do play a role in regulating how much bicarbonate we actually have present in the body, and then that will help to regulate how it functions as a buffer to regulate the pH of the blood. If we talk about the developmental aspects of the urinary system is something that's going to be formed very early during fetal development. And if we look at the images of a fetus right here, by week 5 we can already see some buds of this system developing. We can see how it grows, so week 6, and then we start to see movement in this direction a little bit. By week 8, we see a definite kidney there. By the end of the 3rd month, these kidneys are actually going to be producing and secreting urine. So very early development with the urinary system, and that also emphasizes how crucial this system is to the overall functioning of the body.